Well, originally I came from, at that time they call it East Harbor. I was born in 1945 when a hurricane came through. My mom had to be near the midwife in case she delivered me at any moment. I attended the primary school in South Caicos. Well, of course, we call it South Caicos now, but at that time it was East Harbor. The name sort of changed when Liam McGuire came in the 60s as a surveyor with some others. The same thing happened in Providenciales. Nobody knew this island as Providenciales. They knew it as, you talk about going to Blue Hills, the north side, the Bight and Five Keys. When Fritz Luddington came, it came to it got its natural name, Providenciales. There was a legend about it. According to Gus Lightman, who has gone on now, he said I guess it was probably Christopher Columbus who discovered the West Indies and the Turks and Caicos, even though the Bahamas claimed that he landed there. Gus Lightman said that when they was coming about near Providenciales, a mist came over the land, darkness. And for hours and hours, they seemed to have been lost. They didn't know where they were going. Somehow their compass seemed to give them some problems. And when the mist cleared, they saw this beautiful island, rolling hills, pristine beaches, turquoise waters. They concluded that it was the providence of God that brought them here. And so the name Providenciales emerged. That's legend from Gus Lightburn. Okay, I attended the all age school in East Harbor. There were when I went to school, there were about three teachers. The headmaster, Mrs. Iris Stubbs, who's gone on, and Mrs. Marjorie Baisden. Um, School opened at 9 o'clock, and there were days when the headmaster decided that he would what we call lickings for late. If you arrive late, you would get a few licks in your hand. If you didn't bring a note from your mother to say why you was late. Um, School was the school and the church were the two central things in the community. You had to leave school when you was 14. It was almost compulsory because of the people coming in. Of course, the high school was in Grand Turk. There was no system in place for you to go to high school. When I use the word system, there was no exam set that you took, and if you passed, you went to high school. Your parents either had to have somebody, as they say, to pull a string, or the headmaster thought you were brilliant enough to go to high school, and he would tell your parents. Well, I was one of those who the headmaster thought was smart enough to go to high school. And he promised my dad that he would see that I'd go to high school. This was Ronald Jones, but unfortunately, he left in the late 50s. It might have been 57 or 58. He migrated to the Bahamas. So my opportunity for high school sort of died. Um, Parents also had to pay for the children to go to high school. Um, my dad eventually had 9 of us, one died. So in the 50s, I think there was about 5 or 6 of us in the home. Um, South Caicos was like Grand Turk and Salt Key were the three main salt islands. So the salt industry was the main employer. Apart from that, you had the fisheries. It was not as large as it is today, um, where the lobster factory came into being, I think, in 1958 or something like that, in the late 50s. Um, there were no divers like we had. There was only one local guy who was considered a diver. That was Clifford Duncanson. So they brought in divers from America, from the U.S., and some Cuban Americans who dived. But the bulk of the lobsters came from Blue Hills Provinciales. A number of persons had the sloops. What they did was they made, and the whole of this, the sort of cargo space in the sloop, they made a well that was sealed to cap water. And they had these little dinghy boats. So they were the fishermen. They went out and got the lobsters, put it inside of the hole, and every afternoon, a fast boat from South Caicos would come down. Captain Bruce Lightman was the captain. His mate was from here, but he died. That was Mr. Ewing, who was married to Rona Ewing, Harvard Ewing. And the boat would come and pick up the fish, come back in South Caicos about 7 o'clock in the night. The women would clean the lobsters, have them processed, put it in the freezer. That went on from Monday to Friday. At one time, there was a refrigeration boat, the Augusta, that came down and spent like weeks on the banks. And when they had a full load, she came into South Caicos, and it would be shipped out by air. Southern Air Transport, a company out of Miami, would come and pick up the lobsters and take them. But the Augusta had a misfortune, and she burned down. I remember clearly in the late 50s. She burned down in the harbor in South Caicos. And we all rushed out to see what was happening. The headmaster was Mr. Jones. And when we came back, he called us all in class, saying, "Now I want all of you to write an essay on the burning of the Augusta." So there we were, caught between a rock and a hard place, as it were. He said, "Exactly what you saw. I don't mind what your English would be like, but I want you to give an account of that." The salt industry was a dying industry. My father worked on it. He drove a truck, a 5-ton truck, Bedford truck. The salt was broken up with a peg axe. I think you know what a peg axe is, and a shovel, so that the men went into the salt pans and the brine, salt water, which had turned very thick, called it brine. They had to break it up and take the shovel, then shovel it on the truck. The truck will go to a place in town, and the town area where we call a deposit, and they would have to scoop the soil out back. So you can imagine what that was like. Later on, they brought in some equipment. Well, the soil industry was being subsidized by the British government. It was not private. And initially, during the early 40s, they were locally owned, and the government took it over. So the government was putting money in for the people. You were just surviving, as it were. Um, Later on, as I said, in the late 50s, they brought in these small tractors from England and the dump trucks. So it made life a little easier. But it was a dying industry. Young men were not prepared to go into the salt to rake any salt. So the government decided in 1964. Prior to that, they sent two or three persons from the Foreign Office in London to look at the industry, have a talk with the managers and the men who were working. At that time, the Bahamas, Inagua, and Long Island. Inagua, the salt industry there was owned by a group of brothers called the Ericksons. They later sold it to Morton. So you have Morton Salt Company now. Now, they wanted to buy out the Turks and Caicos salt from the owners, but the owners refused to do it, so they went to Inagua. And a number of persons from South Caicos, one or two from Grand Turk, went to Inagua, but the bulk from South Caicos went and worked in Inagua. That's why we had so many families from South Caicos living in Inagua. I had a number of cousins who parents moved to Inagua. Inagua had a mud modern equipment. I was in Inagua a couple of times. I took some pictures where they build this big dock um, with it went a couple of 100 yards right out. They had to do a little dredging, so the ship will come right up. The salt, the trucks will come up, dump the salt on a belt. The salt will be carried straight into the hull of the ship. Inagua is one of the largest islands in the Bahamas, so they had a lot of space, and they had the modern equipment. Diamond Salt and Long Island had never been there. They were also had modern facilities. So the government said, look, we may as well close shop on this. So in 1964, on the 31st of January, they closed the salt industry in South Caicos, and 10 years later, they closed it in Salt Key. Um, in South Caicos, when they closed it, they paid the people off. Some people were not really paid properly. When I say properly, they didn't get in. They worth more than that. But be that as it may, so the government made all of them. The government was running. We didn't have Barclays Bank or none of these banks then. The government had its own local bank. So each one had a bank book, and whatever money that they had, it was put on this book. And every week they would come and draw the money off until they had no more. So the government decided that tourism would be the next industry for it. A couple of the men were pretty old, so they retired them and give them a monthly pension. The others who were still able, the government instituted what they call a works program, in which they had these men do menial jobs, go around government places and paint it or clean it up and that sort of thing. The fishing industry continued to sustain the community. The women work in the night, and they made a fairly good wage, which was able to subsidize what their um, husbands were making. My dad, every morning at about 7 o'clock, I had to take my dad tea to him. I had to walk in town, which was we lived on the bay. You talk about Kangran, we lived Kangran, and I would say it was probably in town. Let's call it was maybe 3 or 4 miles. I would walk and excuse me, give him his tea. My mom had his thermos and bread and other stuff, and I would sit in the truck with him. He would go to Salt Pond when he's finished. Then I would go back home. Then at midday, he would come home and get his what they call breakfast. Then at 3 o'clock, work was over. He come home and he get his dinner. Um, at when the salt industry closed at 64, I was employed with the Turks and Caicos government. Actually, I had just started being a customs officer, untrained customs officer. All the boys my age, there were none of the boys my age worked in the salt industry. Most of them went to Grand Bahama where Freeport was just rising, and some went to sea when sailing. Well, they were very limited. Grand Turk, the bulk where the civil service was. In South Caicos, you had the commissioner. You had, I'll name them, some people might heard. You had Mr. Butt Malcolm, who became the commissioner. When I got there, he was the government officer. He didn't have the title yet. Then two other English people came in before he was promoted as commissioner. You had Miss Bassett. She took care of, she was a cashier responsible for the government savings bank. Mr. Stanley Brooks, who later on became commissioner of Providenciales as well as South Caicos and Salt Key. He was the accountant. You had Miss Iris. She was what Iris Williams, Reverend Clare mother. She was in charge of the post office. You had Austin Thomas, who was deceased. He was the customs officer. I was the messenger. My job was to open the office, close it, run errands, deliver the telegrams, deliver the government mail when it came in from Grand Turk. I had the good fortune in 19. An Englishman came down in 1968 to look at the entire customer service, to separate it from the Treasury, set up a customer service on its own, Mr. King. He recommended a couple of us to go be trained in Trinidad. I was chosen. I'm the first Turks and Caicos Islander who was trained in Trinidad in 1969 from January to the end of June. I did a 23 weeks customs and excise course. When I came back, John Robinson, who later became customs or collector of customs, he came. The program was being sponsored by the United Nations Development Program. So it ran for a certain couple of years. A number of customs officers went there, and then it was finished. Um, I was promoted. I started coming to Provinciales in the late 60s. It could have been 67, 68. You might have heard about Lou Winery. Lou Winery was a guy who started the inter-island air services. He was going down to Guyana in a seaplane, and he had some problems. He stopped in South Caicos, and he never went any further. Um, I say that to say this, that we landed in Sellers Point in Turtle Cove before it was opened up on a seaplane, me and him and Commissioner Ben Bolt. Um, so there was no air service. He started that. Then Fritz and those started an air service, Caicos Airways. Um, Emery Rocker, you might have heard the name of Emery Rocker. Emery was a pilot. He worked with Fritz and those. And then things just developed from one thing to the other. So I was promoted as the district commissioner. As I said, I started coming to Provo in the late 60s. Albert Grant was here as police officer, a corporal of police to look after customs and immigration and police. Then after he left, Stanley Williams came. But things really started booming. And when Stanley Williams left at the end of 72, I came here in 1st of January 73 and officially opened up the customs office. The office was my home as well, a small little building on the airport road, which later the courts took it over and expanded it. And I would say after that, 73, 10 years later, I was the commissioner of Provinciales. And I became commissioner in March of 83. January of 90, I was assistant chief secretary. I went to Grand Turk, worked in the chief secretary's office, came back as office manager for the tourist board for 5.5 years. They had upgraded the post as deputy chief secretary for Provinciales, just no more commissioner. And then they changed it to permanent secretary for Provinciales affairs. Kingsley Bean came here. I came back from the tourist board to be his deputy and to have the title of protocol officer. I traveled throughout the various islands as a customs officer. I used to go into North Caicos when they were building the Prospect of Whidbey Hotel. I was going into Pine Key when they were building the Meridian Club there. So I've seen it all in that regard. I retired in 2011 after working for 46 years. I left South Caicos um, in January. Well, I took up my post here in 1973. I stayed here for 9 months. In 74, I went back to South Caicos. Um, I don't know whether me and Austin Thomas, when I go to South Caicos, he would come here. So I can't remember. Tom Saunders replaced me from Grand Turk in 1974. I went to Grand Turk in 1977. I came back to South Caicos in 78. I came to Provo in 79. I left in 80. I came back in 1981 and I never went back. Okay, so, well, South Caicos had become a very important spot for private airplanes. A lot of single engine airplanes were being was being taken from Miami down to Venezuela and Brazil. They had enough. Their fuel tanks were very small, so they would leave Miami. Sometimes they would come. Most of the time they would come direct to South Caicos. At times they'll stop in Exuma. They'll come to South Caicos overnight, and then they would go on to San Juan, and then go down the chain. So we were getting at the peak. We were getting like over 300 planes a month. That works out to about 10 a day. Okay, that was a lot of traffic coming through. The island became very famous in that regard. One of the things made it famous was that we had such a unique turnaround service. You know, a plane arrived, and within half an hour, less than an hour, they have the fuel on. The customs already cleared the papers. They get the sandwich. Everybody wanted a sandwich from Dora, lobster sandwich. So after everybody got to know that, when the planes would call in from Miami, well, they had a direct contact with Miami. Miami would tell them, well, our plane is coming and so. They give them the details. By the time the plane can contact the tower, Abbott Mills was the operator there. They would say, well, could you order 6 sandwiches from Dora for me? Fine, no problem. As soon as they land and they clear, they have the sandwich. Then work some more, then they go on. So we had a reputation as being very good. And the other thing also is in terms of the fuel, Norman Saunders was the company was Caicos Air Services, he and Captain Bruce. They had the franchise from Asso Standard Oil. And South Caicos had the second largest fuel depot in the Bahamas. Nassau, Freeport, then South Caicos. They had over 250,000, the space capacity of 250,000 gallons of fuel. That's a lot for a small island like that. Then you had the yachts. We had yachts we had about, maybe the average sometimes would be about 20 yachts a month coming through from Florida, stopping in South Caicos, getting fuel, overnighting, and going on to Puerto Rico or Venezuela. Okay, so it became the commercial hub for the Turks and Caicos at that particular time. Now, on the other side, in terms of the education, well, there was no hospital there. You had a clinic. There used to be a doctor, but majority of the time there was a trained nurse there. If there was a problem, then you had to go to Grand Turk to get it resolved. So the Seventh Adventists came in 1968 and started a school, the Pearson High School. And the government subsidized it, paid, I think, some of the fees for the children. Not too sure. I know you had to pay, but the government took it over some years later. When I grew up, okay, the church and the school was the two main things in the community. The church bells. One of the things, two things I missed when I first came here permanently, hearing these church bells toll on Sunday morning and hearing the roosters crowing. Those two distinct things. The Anglican church had bell, had a sun. You can hear it all over the island. The Methodist church, I'm a Methodist layman for over 50 years. The Baptist also had a bell. The church, if a person died, the bell, I can't remember how many strokes there was. So you say, oh yeah, a man died, or a woman died, or a child died. We had what we call entertainments, okay, where during some time of the year they would have skits. I guess you have to call it skits, okay? You would go up, recite, you would sing a song or have a dance. Um, that vanished. Um, Going to Sunday school. My first 10 years was in the Anglican church. My mom was a staunch Anglican. My dad was Methodist, but at that early years, he didn't go to church as often as my mom. So I went to the Anglican church. Her sister was married to the catechist, who also was the organist, Mr. Erlen Saunders. So I went to an Anglican church, and in 1955, my dad told me, look, you're Methodist, you have to go to Methodist church. Every first Sunday in the month at the Methodist church, you had a program. You went up, you recite, you sang a duet or so. I can remember me and my cousin Oliver Mills, Carl Mills' brother. We would be just singing to who can sing the top of the voices. I can see us now standing up singing Mother. One of our favorite hymns, and that was we look forward to that for a whole hour. That doesn't happen anymore. Um, Even to get the children to learn a poem, I was disappointed in a sense when we had a Heritage Day affair here. I offered $100, $50 each for a student to recite something. Two of them, and only one, and that one, he didn't even learn it all because he still had the sheet in front of him. You know, I said, "Oh my goodness!" Those kind of things we lost it. Um, the songs, you had people, Mr. Julius Jennings, who they call Goo, Mr. Herman Rigby, you call him Mandudi, Sam Smith. Um, Goo made songs of things that happened in the community. Okay, you heard David Bourne resurrected the song "I Dig Dear, Garland Dig Dear." It is actually a story of two local persons, Mr. Garland, Charlene Cartwright, grandfather, and Clement Seymour. They both used to go and look for turtle eggs and look for driftwood. And they found that, well, they knew how to find the turtle nest. They found it, and the two nests were near each other. And they both were taking eggs from one. It appears that Mr. Garland hand went inside his hole where he was. So when he came, he was a little angry. He stammered a bit. He came back over, tell his wife, I dig there, and Garland dig there, and Garland put his finger right in my hole. That became a song, okay, and other things that Good Jennings made, things that happened in the community. We don't have anybody now. In those days, it was the guitar, it was the maracas, as we call it, it was a saw, even a bottle. You hit it, all of that. Now we're trying to bring some of that back, but those were the things, that happened in my early days. Later on, when the jukebox came in on the 70s and sort of changed everything. But Mr. McGuire, who was the manager of the Caicos Company and who converted um, an old house into the Admiral's Arms Hotel, he used to have Good Jennings and those. Whenever he had guests in on a Friday or Saturday night, he would bring them up there and they would play the accordion. And the tour was like that. It was something different. Well, yeah. The regatta is the oldest national event in the Turks and Caicos. Um, it came out of the visit from the Queen in 1966. Um, at that time, when the Queen came, the Women's Federation was very, what should I say? They had a branch of Women's Federation throughout the Caicos Islands. They were very active. Um, they had a stall in South Caicos so the Queen could see all the handiwork. Apart from that, just about all the sloops from the islands came into South Caicos. My estimate were probably about 30 of them. When the Queen was leaving, when the Britannia, the boat that she was on, when they were getting ready to go, they had what they call a sail pass. All the sloops hoist their sails and they sail on. It is a scene that you will never see again in the Turks and Caicos. It still is in my mind. And Liam Maguire, along with Mr. Bud Malcolm, Captain Stanley, and Fritz and those, they decided that we should have some event to commemorate the visit of the Queen. The regatta was born out of that. I was the one who rode the donkey during the visit of the Queen that made her laugh. The picture that was taken of the Queen, she was mesmerized by the donkey race because the donkey I had, he was not running, he was just jumping up, he was just making fun. Norman Sanders and I, after Liam Maguire left the Caicos Company, or after his services were terminated, he went to Pine Key. Most people thought that there wouldn't be any regatta. And Norman and I decided, oh yeah, there's going to be a regatta. We reorganized the committee and we kept in touch with Bank and Fritz. Well, Bank really, because Fritz used to be on and off. And we did what we had to do. I would travel to Grand Turk, to Providenciales. I would go on Radio Turks and Caicos and talk about the regatta, what we're having. I would get donations from the businesses. We produce a small booklet. Come to Provo, do the same thing. So it is a part of my DNA. It means a lot to me. And over the years, it had sagged. We had lost the true meaning of it because we had no more sailing sloops. It became a weekend of just fun and frolic where people were just going drinking and have fun, and they couldn't care less whether you had one boat or 10 boats in the harbor. Well, the regatta is not that. And so we try to bring it back again to its original state. So as long as I'm mentally fit, physically fit, I would see that the regatta is on its right path. In fact, the weekly newspaper now, they have a site. I got a call from a girl about 2 weeks ago, wanted me to do something about the regatta. I wrote an article on it. It's in one of the magazines that I have. Kathy Barrington interviewed me and did it. So it is what it should be. Last year was the 56th anniversary. It was great. They did a professional magazine, and I believe this year will be even greater.